Let's do our terminology review for Lesson 4, Real Property Issues. Terminology review for Lesson 4. First term, adverse possession. Here again is an important term. We began this chapter talking about rights in property. What happens if somebody takes all your rights away from you, if you will, steals them from you? That's what adverse possession basically is. If you don't take care of the property that you own, that you have legal rights to, and somebody comes on that property for a 20-year period of time, occupies it openly, notoriously, uninterruptedly for 20 years, they can actually go to court and take title to it. You try to get them off after 20 years and they say, no, it's my property. They'll go and the court will give them title to it. So keep dispossessors off your property. Always look at your properties, go to them, view them, make sure nobody's making an illegal use of them. And if they are, then make sure you get rid of them. Appraisers do appraisals. Okay, we do CMAs and BPOs. Appropriative rights, basically these are states where you've got bodies of water like rivers. Sometimes people upstream will appropriate it or sort of take it for themselves and block it from going downstream, in which case you have to go to court and file a suit against them for misappropriation of their appropriative rights. Appurtenance is anything that goes along with the sale of property. So basically, when you take title to the land and any appurtenance, if you will, anything attached to it, physical or non-physical, like lien rights. If you buy somebody's property, that lien is going to be appurtenant to the property too. So make sure that lien is released before you take title to it, Mr. Buyer. Arm's length transaction, we talked a little bit about that, kind of a fair transaction, so that whatever it's sold for, we want to make sure there isn't some unusual item in the sale that might keep it from representing what would be that particular property being its sale price being market value, some unusual condition in it. Assemblage, again, combining two or more parcels, and of course, plottage is the attendant value after we combine it. Commercial Broker Liens Act. Important to know that in Illinois, we have a Commercial Brokers Lien Act, which ostensibly gives a commercial broker a lien on property for their commission. We do not have a lien available for residential brokers. But commercial brokers do have a lien on the property that gives them a lot more leverage in making sure they get paid at closing. Comparables, we've talked about those. Those are usually recently sold properties or properties that are on the market right now that are, quote, comparable or competing or will be competing with their property. CMA is the process we go through in coming up with an opinion of value using those comparables. The CERCLA is basically a federal environmental act that really pinpoints that it affects these abandoned industrial sites, sometimes called brownfields. And CERCLA has set up standards of what can or can't be done with those properties as far as selling them. So anytime we're dealing with an abandoned waste site or a gas station or with industrial old abandoned industrial buildings, CERCLA may in fact require us to make certain environmental inspections on the property and reports on the property before we can sell it and somebody can purchase it. Cost approach, that's the approach that we use as we use the CMA approach on residential property. We use the cost approach on unique properties. Sometimes on what we call new construction, we can use the cost approach. Conformity, We like to see all properties conform as much as they can one to another in a particular neighborhood. Contribution is what happens when an improvement is made to property. It usually contributes to the value of the property. And as I said before earlier, the improvement, whatever the cost of the improvement was, it typically doesn't add that much to the sale price of the property. And this is where you have a problem with sellers sometimes. You'll tell them what their property is worth, and they'll say yes, but it's you've got to add on another $50,000 because we have a brand new kitchen and we paid $50,000 for it. Even though you put $50,000 into your new kitchen, it's not going to add to the value of the property, $50,000 worth. It'll add something, but that improvement won't be 100% attributed to the value of the property. Curb appeal. People neglect this sometimes. Very important in appraising property, very important in marketing property to get the property looking good from the curb. Most buyers make their mind up to purchase a property almost from the time they pull up to it. That's how important curb appeal is. So if we have great curb appeal and then the inside of the property looks good, that's where this process called staging or decorating a house is important. If we do both those, have strong curb appeal, and then we do a good job in staging the property, then our odds of a sale are much greater. Days on the market, sometimes that can tell us whether or not our property is overpriced. If our property is lingering on the market a lot longer than other similar properties are by days on the market, maybe that's telling us that we've overpriced our properties and we have to reconsider our value. Demand. Again, demand and supply are the two primary driving forces that affect the value. Depreciation, there's really two kinds of depreciation. One is when we would use like the cost approach. Depreciation would be the loss in value of the property based on its physical depreciation, based on its functional obsolescence, based on its economic obsolescence. That's one form of depreciation. Another form of depreciation we use in the real estate business has nothing to do with that really. It's depreciation on the building itself that we can basically shelter from depreciation deductions from our income taxes. So the other depreciation, the IRS depreciation, is where we can take an asset and depreciate it over a period of time. And then each year we can deduct a certain amount of depreciation from the net income that we get on the property, thereby sheltering some of our net income from the tax guy, IRS. Dominant tenements, so we're talking about servient and dominant tenements. This is when we have easements. The dominant tenement controls the easement, and it benefits from the easement. Later, we're going to talk about the servient tenement, and that's the one that serves. So we're talking about easements now. We're talking about easements appurtenant, which basically are easements with properties next to each other. We're talking about easements by condemnation. Sometimes the government will take an easement, say like the railroad will come in and just take an easement across the back of your farm property rather than condemning all of it and having to buy the entire farm from you. It simply takes an easement by condemnation just across the back, and usually there's an award that you're given for their easement that they're taking, let's say on the back of your property for, say, a railroad line that's going to run through there. And then easement by grant basically is an easement that is found typically in a deed where maybe I go to sell you my property and in the negotiation you want me to give you an easement to go across, let's say, the property next to you, which I also own. So I might, in our deed, grant you an easement to go across a different parcel than the one that I'm selling you to make the deal work. Easement by express reservation. This is where typically when I'm dividing a property up, I would transfer the servient tenement but retain the dominant tenement. So what I might do is almost the reverse. I would sell you a property allowing me to go upon your property because I don't want to lose my, let's say, access to a lake or something. So this is almost the reverse of the one we just talked about, where in this case, I would, in the deed that I give to you on your property, I would reserve an easement for me across that property. Easement implication, basically this is an implied easement. It's similar to an easement by necessity. An easement by necessity is one where you can't be landlocked. So if I live next to you and the road is washed out in front of your house, it can't be built because of an earthquake or a flood that went through there. The court could give you an easement over my property in order for you of ingress and egress to get in and out of your property. Sometimes called an easement by necessity, sometimes called an easement by ingress and egress. Easement by prescription, long time usage. You go across my property for 20 years and I don't stop you. Then one day I decide I want to keep you off my property. You could go to court and declare an easement by long-term usage by prescription. Light and air easement, you were seeing a little of these view easements pop up where if we live on a hill and you live below me, I have a beautiful view of the ocean, and then you build 2 or 3 or 4 stories up, or maybe you put a big tower on top of your roof, and that destroys my view, my easement for a view easement. And it can be also for light and air. Maybe I can't get enough light then because of the height that you've added on to your building. It blocks me from the sun or something. So those are other kinds of easements. An easement in gross is simply an easement on one parcel of property. So you don't really have dominant and servient tenements because it's just on one parcel. It would be an easements in gross are like utility easements. Implements are working crops, and they're considered personal property. So implements, working crops don't necessarily go along with a sale. Eminent domain is the right of the government to come and take your property and then actually take title to it. Different than an easement by eminent domain easement. Eminent domain and purchase and taking your property, they take all of it. They own all of it, and you've got to leave. Okay, that's the way highways are built typically. The government comes in and declares an eminent domain on a bunch of parcels. You leave basically, and they start building the road. They give you what is called just compensation for it, and how that happens is kind of beyond our little review right now. An encroachment is a physical object that intrudes onto the boundaries of your property, usually due to a mistake when that was built. People didn't pay attention to the boundaries and they built the fence on your parcel, not on theirs. An encumbrance is anything that might diminish the value of the property. A lien, an easement, a restrictive covenant might burden the title to the property. Easements sometimes, encumbrances sometimes can diminish the value of the property. Environmental impact study, that's according to the environmental laws. You may have to have that done before you sell the property. EPA, again, they're responsible for enforcing the CERCLA Acts. Escheat, when you die in Illinois and there's no one there to take your property, the property will escheat to the county where the property is located. In Illinois, if there's no heirs left, the property will revert to the county, and then they can do with it what they want. Fixture, anything that was personal property but has been so attached it becomes part of the real property. Gross rent multiplier, those are used to determine the value of small income properties, usually 1 to 4 unit properties. Basically, you take the gross rent, that a small investor thinks they can get for the property, and then you multiply that by the multiplier, which is a way of coming up with a factor that other small investors have as far as a return on their small investment properties. And if you multiply those two, that'll give you an idea of what the value of that small income property would be. 1 to 4 units. Highest and best use we talked about. Immobility, a physical characteristic of real estate that makes real estate unique from personal property in that it cannot be moved. The income approach, of course, that's used with income producing property. That's the IRV formula. Indestructibility, another physical characteristic of real estate. Technically, real estate can't be destroyed. We can take a couple of divots of burnt dirt out of it, maybe even dig down hundreds of feet, but we can't destroy real property because real property runs to the center of the earth. Land, we have these 3 separate areas of real estate. We have land, we have air rights, and we have subsurface rights. A license is a means of letting somebody use your property, but you retain ownership of it, and you can remove them whenever you want. So a license is a personal right you give people. It's not like an easement where they now have real property rights. Liens, we talked about. Lis pendens, we talked about. Littoral rights, we've talked about. Market value, we've discussed that. That's what we think property is going to sell for. Match pair analysis, not particularly important. That's really what happens with those comps when you compare the comp to the subject property feature by feature. That's called a match pair analysis. Mold, non-possessory interest, nuisance, personal property. Discussed this earlier in this chapter. Plottage we discussed. Policing power. Policing power is the right of the state to control private individuals' real estate. And how do they do it? They do it through zoning ordinances, and they do it through building codes. Those are the ways the government polices everybody's property to make sure everybody adheres to the same, if you will, principles, rules of law to protect each property and the owner's public health, public safety, public morals, and the general welfare. So this is the way the police, the government, we call it policing powers, which some people don't like the term policing powers, but nevertheless, it's the ability of the government to control all of our properties for the betterment of all of our properties. And then radon gas. We'll talk more about that in another chapter. We talk about environmental issues in another chapter. Real property, Residential Lead Paint Hazard Reduction Act. The big thing here is the year 1978. If we're selling a property or leasing a property built before 1978, then we have to make lead-based paint disclosures to our purchasers or to our tenants that the property either doesn't have lead-based paint or it had lead-based paint and it was mitigated. Right away, again, it would be another easement. Riparian rights, river rights, we talked about those. Sales comparison approach, talked about that. Scarcity, okay, it has to do with supply. Servient tenement, that's the opposite of the dominant tenement. The servient tenement is the tenement whereby this is the parcel and the parcel owner that is burdened by the easement. They basically serve the dominant tenement. And so the servient tenement, basically because they're serving the dominant tenement, they can't terminate that easement upon their own will. They can't say, I'm tired of you going back and forth my property. I'm going to stop you from doing that. In fact, not only can you not do that, you have to maintain that easement path that they're using, they're going over. You have to maintain it for the dominant tenement's benefit. So it's a big obligation when you become a servient tenement. I think we've been through all these. The trade fixture is different than a fixture. The trade fixture, the big difference with trade fixtures these are fixtures that are put in by commercial tenants. And what's important is that these commercial tenants put these in, and these become their trade fixtures. They use them in their business. And what's important about that is a trade fixture is personal property. In other words, that belongs to that commercial tenant. So the commercial tenant can remove their trade fixtures prior to the expiration of date of that commercial lease. Different than fixtures. A fixture is where, let's say, an owner attaches stuff to their property that is not easily or not intended to be moved. Like, let's say the owner puts in a new heating system. Well, I can't sell you the property, and then at closing you go over and I've ripped out the furnace and the AC unit. I put it on the back of my truck and I've taken it to my new house. No, that stays with the property. I'm either going to have to bring it back or buy you a new one. Okay, those are fixtures. Okay, they become part of the real estate. Trade fixtures don't become part of the real estate. As long during the term of the lease, they belong as personal property to the commercial tenant. Transferability, trespass, unlawful use. Okay, so trespassers aren't supposed to be in the property, and if you find trespassers, you want to get rid of them. USTs, that's underground storage tanks, and those must be removed before anybody can market that property. Let's say abandoned gas station would be a good example that would have an underground storage tank, and those have to be removed by licensed UST removal services. Not anybody can just go in and dig up those tanks and then get rid of them. It's not a complicated process, but it's a very important process to get done when we have underground storage tanks, and only used licensed mitigators to take those out. Uniqueness, value. And then we can go on to the key concepts.